If one night you find yourself sitting in a room lit only by the faint glow of a screen, watching lines of text being typed out by an AI model in your stead, you might suddenly pause and wonder, how can something with no heart, no lungs, no brain understand you and respond as if it were a person? That question sounds modern, tied to Silicon Valley, to offices blazing with light where engineers fine-tune algorithms through the night. But in truth, that question is older than almost everything we know about our own history. Human beings have whispered that question beside campfires, on warships, inside temples, and in rooms where candlelight flickered against stone walls. They pondered it at a time when writing itself was still young, and every myth seemed to carry a dim memory of its own. Could we create intelligence out of matter that does not breathe? From the deepest chambers of ancient imagination stepped out figures so uncanny that even now repeating their names can send a shiver down the spine. Talos, the giant of bronze, so tall his shadow draped over the harbor of Crete. Stories tell that each day, Talos circled the island 3 times, searching for intruders. He was not just a metal warrior. He could discern, decide, and act. No one called him AI, but the idea behind Talos is startlingly familiar. A lifeless construct given the task of observing, analyzing, and making choices. A machine with intention. Then came the golden servants of Hephaestus, the solitary smith god who labored inside volcanoes. Those attendants could move, understand their master's voice, and assist him in his workshop. In the imagination of the ancient Greeks, they were no different from the service robots the modern world aches to build. The only difference is that the ancients conceived them more than 2,000 years before humans learned how to program. And then there was Galatea, the statue Pygmalion carved with all the fervor of obsession and longing. When the goddess granted her life, the sculptor did not merely witness a body stirring, he witnessed a mind being born, an intelligence not sprung from nature, but from human hands. Galatea is the earliest story in history about the human desire to create a being with a mind like our own, but without the condition of being human. It was the seed of a question that has never burned out. Are we trying to become the creators of our own second intelligence? Move now to ancient Judaic lands, and you will find the golem, an earthen creature awakened by sacred letters. Unlike the mighty Talos or the enchanting Galatea, the golem carried a heavier omen, a creation that could obey flawlessly but knew no boundaries. If Galatea was a dream, the golem was the nightmare that warned of consequences humans had not yet imagined. An intelligence without limits might protect you, yet it could also crush everything around it simply because it was following orders too perfectly. Even in the dim laboratories of medieval alchemists, people once whispered about the homunculus, a tiny creature formed inside a glass vessel. It needed no heart, it only needed a formula. That vision, though unscientific, reveals something essential. From very early on, humanity believed intelligence did not have to sprout from a brain. It could be made, crafted, assembled from materials that held no life of their own. If we thread all these stories together, we see a quiet but unbroken line. AI is not a technology. It is an ancient instinct, a strange impulse that drives humans to seek their own reflection in something non-human, to create a copy of the mind separated from flesh. Perhaps it is because humans have always felt a certain loneliness inside their own intelligence and wanted to see what might happen if that intelligence were placed in another vessel, one freed from fragility. Imagine you are walking into an ancient library 2,000 years ago. The scrolls resting on the shelves are filled with the same question. Can intelligence be breathed into bronze, into clay, into stone? Can thought, something invisible, elusive, be made from cold, rigid material? The ancients did not know how to program, but they understood something we sometimes forget. To grasp what intelligence is, one must first try placing it into another form. And then, slowly, the dream began to drift away from poetry. It slipped into the hands of blacksmiths, early engineers, mechanical artisans in temples, and the mysterious architects of Islamic palaces. They could not create intellect, but they could create movement. And movement, when arranged with enough artistry, could feel like intention, like spirit. That was the moment when mythology began to crack, and through that fracture, the first machines emerged. Not computers, but bronze devices that opened temple doors on their own, figurines that poured wine, birds that tapped rhythms on drums without a human guiding their motion. For the first time in history, humans saw metal move by itself, and they felt something uncannily familiar, yet profoundly strange. As if inside the iron and bronze, a hidden will had begun to stir. And that is precisely where the next chapter of this story begins, at the threshold where mythic imagination slowly becomes mechanics, and the first self-operating machines lead humanity to ask, can movement give birth to thought? When the echoes of mythology were still lingering in human imagination, people began turning toward a strange new crossroads. They wanted to transform those supernatural figures into something tangible, operable, visible right before their eyes, not through magic, but through mechanics, the art of arranging pressure, levers, gears, water force, and the delicate intuition of technical craftsmanship. And then, from the small workshops of Alexandria, where the Mediterranean Sea sent damp winds through every open doorway, the first automaton machines began to stir. Among the earliest pioneers, none left a stronger imprint than Heron of Alexandria, an engineer, a mathematician, and in a way, a storyteller who worked in metal. Heron's manuscripts describe devices that, through the lens of modern understanding, seem to stand between myth and the earliest form of robotics. He created temple doors that opened on their own, not through human hands, but through a system of water vessels, air pressure, and transmission cords. When worshippers offered sacrifices, the fire on the altar heated the air, pushing water through a hidden pipe, pulling the cords that slowly swung the temple doors open. To ancient eyes, this was not engineering. It was divine intervention. Heron also fashioned figurines that poured wine, early steam-powered devices, and most strikingly, mechanical theaters where gods appeared, vanished, and spoke through networks of pulleys concealed backstage. Anyone who witnessed such scenes could not escape a lingering, eerie question: how could metal act with such precise sequencing? What directed it? Was there a spirit dwelling inside? If, in mythology, the giant Talos circled the island 3 times each day, then in the temples of Alexandria, the doors opened at the precise moment offerings were made, almost as if the gods themselves were responding to human devotion. It was at this intersection between science and religion that the concept of the automatic began to glimmer. And with it arose a gentle version of the foundational AI question. Can an action performed without human will evoke the feeling of thought? In the centuries after Heron, those mechanical seeds did not disappear. They traveled along trade routes, crossed deserts, and seeped into Islamic libraries, places where the knowledge of the ancient world was preserved with meticulous curiosity. And in the prosperous Middle East of the medieval era, another figure pushed the dream of mechanical intelligence further: Al-Jazari. If Heron was the inventor of divine theaters, then Al-Jazari was the one who ushered mechanics into daily life, into palaces, into rituals, into the rhythms of royal households. He created mechanical musicians, figurines playing lutes, beating drums, following rhythms encoded by wooden pegs. He built automatic servants that poured water over guests' hands as they prepared for an audience with the ruler. He even designed palace. Clocks adorned with birds and human figures that took turns moving each hour, as though they were the guardians of time. And, strangely enough, These machines did more than mimic human actions. They stirred a sense that inside them was some kind of decision-making system, purely mechanical, yes, but still capable of imitating intention. A figurine lifted a water jug at just the right moment, drum beats sounded exactly on schedule, and a door parted when the master arrived. Each movement followed the logic of engineering, yet somehow gave viewers the impression that they were witnessing a primitive form of intelligence, an intelligence made of metal. Imagine the moment when people of the past stood before such devices. There were no screens, no code, yet they felt the same mix of curiosity and anticipation we feel when watching modern AI operate. It was the sensation of seeing lifeless matter exhibit behavior. And in the human heart, that experience has always triggered a quiet, indescribable tremor, as though life itself were flickering somewhere inside the mechanism. Across the medieval world, fascination with these automatic wonders spread. From the singing birds of Andalusia, powered by pressurized air channels, to the shape-shifting fountains in Persian gardens, to the water clocks where figurines took turns moving each hour. In every gear, every pipe, every lead weight rolling inside a wooden frame, an idea slowly took form. If movement could be perfectly controlled, perhaps it could begin to resemble thought. Mechanical artisans did not pose philosophical questions, yet the devices they built, with a precision so fine it bordered on the supernatural, planted an important seed in humanity's mind. Thought might have structure. If machines could follow sequences of commands expressed through motion, then perhaps one day they could follow sequences of commands expressed through reasoning. And at that exact point, amid the soft roar of water in pipes and the clicking of gears meeting their teeth, a new perspective on intelligence emerged. Intelligence might be something constructed, not necessarily something born. Mythic dreams gradually yielded to technical thinking, to the belief that if we could simulate the movement of a body, then perhaps one day we could simulate the movement of a mind. As automaton machines became more intricate, the world began to require something else, a method for modeling thought as precisely as engineers modeled motion. Gears could generate action, but they could not answer the deeper question: how is a decision formed? Does reason have an internal architecture? Can thinking be written into rules? That question would lead humanity into an entirely different adventure, one no longer housed in mechanical workshops, but in the books of philosophers and logicians. A journey that would lay the foundations for true AI. The journey of turning thought into symbols, turning reasoning into systems, and transforming the question, can machines move, into a far greater question: can machines think? When the automaton machines of Heron and Al-Jazari began astonishing ancient spectators with their ability to imitate human actions, another question, quieter but far deeper, started to surface. If movement can be designed through gears and pressure, then through what can thought be designed? A mechanical arm can lift a jug of water along a predetermined path. So could a mechanical mind arrive at a conclusion by following the path of reason? This question did not reside in workshops or forges, but in thick volumes where philosophers, mathematicians, and thinkers had been examining the nature of intelligence for thousands of years. To understand AI today, we cannot ignore that calm but persistent current of ideas, where thought was taken apart piece by piece, just as a mechanic disassembles a machine to see what allows it to run. From the 4th century BCE, Aristotle regarded thinking not as a spontaneous shower of ideas, but as a form of structure. He recognized that humans reason through relationships, through rules, through logic, what would later be called the syllogism. If all humans must die, and Socrates is human, then Socrates must die. It sounds simple, yet within that simplicity lies a tremendous insight. Thought can be written as rules. A brain does not merely react to the world, it processes information through stable patterns. Aristotle never knew computers, yet his ideas became the first brick on the long path toward AI. If thought has rules, then it can be modeled by a rule-based system. Many centuries later, as Europe entered the Age of Enlightenment, a figure emerged with an ambition so immense that even now it makes scholars shiver: Leibniz. He believed that all debates, all arguments, all intellectual conflicts could be settled through a universal language, a place where thoughts were encoded into symbols. He wrote, "If we can calculate thought, all disagreement will cease." Leibniz never built such a machine, but he left behind a revolutionary notion. Thought can be represented mathematically. That idea slept for centuries, but it held the seed of something far larger. Thought can be expressed as computation, and computation can be executed by machines. The 19th and early 20th centuries witnessed dramatic advances in mathematical logic. George Boole transformed logic into algebra, bringing true and false into the realm of 0 and 1. After him, Frege and other logicians continued packaging thought into fully formalized systems of symbols. They were not thinking about AI, yet they created something upon which all modern AI depends: formal logic, the domain in which reasoning is performed not through emotions or experience, but through rules. Humanity still had not created any mechanical intelligence, but it had created something even more important: a blueprint for how intelligence functions, as though before building a machine, we had already written its instruction manual. Then came the early 20th century, when mathematics began pressing against the limits of its own foundations, and a name appeared as if by destiny: Alan Turing. Turing was not just a mathematician, he was someone who saw what no one else had yet seen. Thought could be simulated through a mechanical process. In his 1936 paper, Turing described an imaginary machine, one that did not need to exist in metal, yet was capable of performing every logical procedure imaginable. Using only a red head, an infinite tape, and a set of rules, the Turing machine could compute anything describable as a procedure. Its significance can hardly be overstated. If thought is a sequence of rules, then a machine can carry out thought. The world of Heron and Al-Jazari, where actions were mimicked through mechanics, was now expanded. Action could be simulated, and so could reasoning. But Turing did not stop there. He posed a question humanity is still wrestling with today: can machines think? In his 1950 paper, he proposed a bold experiment. If a person cannot distinguish a machine's answers from a human's in conversation, then there is no meaningful basis to deny that the machine thinks. That experiment, later called the Turing test, was never meant to measure intelligence. It was a mirror held up to human psychology. It forced us to ask, where does intelligence reside? In the physical structure of the brain, or in the behavior we can observe? Turing never claimed that machines truly possess minds. What he said, gently yet profoundly, was, if the behavior is correct, we must consider the possibility of thought within metal. At the time, such an idea was like lightning striking the desks of scientists. A machine was no longer just a device executing orders. It might be a device capable of simulating thought itself. And so, over more than 2 millennia, humanity traveled from myths of artificial beings to automated machines that could move, to formal logic and theoretical computation, all converging toward a new threshold. If thought can be described, and that description can be computed, then intelligence can be built. The world was about to enter a new era, one where the first models of artificial neurons, the first programmable machines, and the first attempts to simulate intelligence would no longer belong to philosophy, but to engineering. From here, the history of AI would step away from the desks of philosophers and walk straight into laboratories where thought would be turned into wires, circuits, and electric currents. When the ideas of Aristotle, Leibniz, Boole, and Turing had turned thought into a describable sequence of rules. Humanity entered a different moment. For the first time in history, people no longer regarded thinking solely as a philosophical riddle, but as something that could be computed. Yet to transform these theoretical descriptions into reality, humanity needed something new. A machine capable of performing millions of logical steps in the blink of an eye. That machine began to appear in the mid-20th century, in the clicking of relays, the hiss of warming resistors, and the blinking lights on control panels as large as walls. This was the era in which computers were not merely tools for arithmetic. They were tangible promises that thought could be simulated using electricity. The earliest computers, like ENIAC or the devices designed by von Neumann's team, were not symbols of AI. They were massive steel constructs built for war, used to compute artillery trajectories or generate logarithm tables for the military. But hidden beneath the whirl of cooling fans and the maze-like tangles of cables was a capacity even their creators barely grasped. Computers could execute logical rules at speeds far beyond human reach. What Aristotle and Leibniz once described with ink, what Boole built with algebra, could now be carried out by voltage, vacuum tubes, and machine instructions. Turing had laid the theoretical foundation for a thinking machine. The post-war scientists were constructing its physical incarnation. Yet, even as computers grew more powerful, one question remained. Human thought is not built solely on logical rules. It is flexible, ambiguous, and able to recognize patterns without being explicitly told. Where did that ability come from? The answer, unexpectedly, emerged from a 1943 paper, not by computer engineers, but by two scientists trying to describe how neurons in the brain functioned, Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitts. They had no brain scans, no modern computers, but they possessed a daring intuition. If each neuron in the brain could be viewed as a switch based on an activation threshold, then the entire brain could be modeled as a network of simple switches. And with that idea, they produced the first model of an artificial neuron. An artificial neuron is not miraculous. It receives input signals, aggregates them, and fires or does not fire based on a threshold. Yet that simplification captured an essential truth. Intelligence could be expressed as the combination of many simple units. When McCulloch and Pitts published their model, they opened a door through which intelligence was no longer treated as a metaphysical mystery, but as a network that could be analyzed, simulated, and, one day, built. Around the same time, in the long hallways of IBM and research institutions across North America, another idea began taking shape. If artificial neurons could model the brain, then networks of such neurons might be able to learn. And soon after, the appearance of the perceptron, introduced by Frank Rosenblatt in the late 1950s, ignited hopes that computers might learn the way humans do. Perceptrons could classify data points, recognize patterns, and more importantly, adjust their own weights, a primitive form of memory. The scientific world celebrated this idea as a monumental breakthrough. Newspapers described the perceptron as the first machine capable of self-learning. Some researchers even proclaimed that within just a few years, computers would understand language, perceive the world through sensors, and eventually think. But the dream, too large and too bright, became its own obstacle. The perceptron had severe limits. Its single-layer structure prevented it from solving complex problems. When these flaws were highlighted by Minsky and Poppert, the wave of enthusiasm quickly receded. Yet the important thing was not the disappointment. It was the seed the perceptron had planted. Machine learning began to be viewed as a method for simulating intelligence, not merely a mathematical trick. During this era, computers transitioned from vacuum tubes to transistors and then to integrated circuits. Each hardware leap expanded the capacity to simulate thought. Electricity flowed faster, memory grew larger, logic circuits became more intricate. Machines could finally run long programs for hours without crashing. With that newfound stability, humans began to dream of models of intelligence on scales once unimaginable. More importantly, computers became programmable, structured according to von Neumann's architecture, memory storing both data and programs, a control unit and arithmetic unit, all functioning like a primitive nervous system made of electricity. In other words, humanity had created matter capable of storing and executing thought. When we gather all the pieces of this era, from ENIAC to IBM, from artificial neurons to perceptrons, we see something clearly. Humanity was shifting from simulating action to simulating the process of thought itself. Mythology had created images of beings capable of acting. Heron had created motion through mechanics. Logic had given structure to reasoning. And now, computers have provided the physical substrate in which that reasoning could live in metal. Only one final piece was missing. A shared intellectual framework, an official declaration, a community of scientists standing together to say, "We will create artificial intelligence." That moment would arrive in the summer of 1956 at a small event called the Dartmouth Conference, where a small group of thinkers believed that intelligence could be simulated, and that belief would reshape the trajectory of the entire world. By the mid-20th century, all the pieces needed to form artificial intelligence had finally appeared. Mythology had planted in humanity the notion of lifeless beings capable of action. Ancient mechanicians had proven that movement could be mimicked through structure. Philosophers and logicians had turned thought into rules. Computers provided the physical substance in which those rules could live through electricity. Artificial neurons have revealed the possibility of modeling how the brain learns. But it was not until the summer of 1956, in a small room at Dartmouth College, that all those pieces were gathered into one declaration humanity had never dared to speak aloud. Intelligence could be built. At that moment, America was overflowing with post-war technological confidence. Computers were growing stronger, laboratories were sprouting everywhere, and science seemed capable of touching almost anything. But to transform the scattered dream of thinking machines into a real scientific discipline, someone had to name it. That person was John McCarthy, young scientist with sharp eyes and a deep conviction that intelligence could be described and programmed. In his proposal for the Dartmouth Conference, McCarthy wrote, "Every aspect of learning or intelligence can in principle be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it." In 1956, such a sentence was like planting a flag atop a mountain no one had believed could be climbed. McCarthy was not alone. He invited the boldest minds of his era. Marvin Minsky, who believed intelligence could be broken into small modules like gears and then reassembled into a mind. Herbert Simon and Alan Newell, who believed computers could produce human-like reasoning. And many other young scientists carrying the fierce intuition that intelligence was no longer the exclusive domain of biology. In that room at Dartmouth, they were not merely discussing science. They were naming a future. And the name they chose, simple but resonant, was artificial intelligence. The atmosphere of the conference did not resemble a modern scientific event with grand stages or polished presentations. It felt more like a small gathering of determined dreamers, debating how humans think, discussing the possibility of writing programs to solve math problems, exploring ways for machines to learn from data, and imagining methods for machines to adjust themselves the way brains learn. No one there believed AI was distant. They believed machines could progress swiftly. Simon and Newell even predicted, "Within 10 years, a computer will beat humans at chess, prove every mathematical theorem, and learn anything a human can learn." They were wrong, but not because they were naive. They were wrong because they were far ahead of their time. Right at Dartmouth, the first signs of success began to appear. Newell and Simon presented the logic theorist, a program capable of proving 38 theorems from Bohr. Principia Mathematica, even finding a shorter proof than the one created by the book's authors. Meanwhile, Minsky was so optimistic that he believed modeling intelligence was merely a matter of time and resources, like building a house out of bricks. With enough bricks, it would be done. Looking back, those programs seem rudimentary, but at the time, they felt like the very first whispers of a newborn intelligence. A form of classical AI was crystallizing, running on rules and logical inference. As if, for the first time in history, humans were hearing the faint sound of intelligence emerging from a machine. When the conference ended, no one realized they had opened a door to decades of research. But one thing changed forever. From that point on, artificial intelligence was no longer a scattered idea. It became a scientific field. AI laboratories emerged in the 1960s. MIT founded its AI lab under Minsky's leadership. Stanford launched its lab under McCarthy. The first programs for solving equations, proving theorems, and processing language were being built. Machines were no longer simply executing commands, they were solving problems, and each advancement carried a feeling that was both wondrous and slightly unsettling. For if a machine could solve math, reason, and triumph in games of intellect, what would stop it from stepping into the broader realms of human intelligence? In those years, optimism was almost the default atmosphere. Researchers believed they were only a few steps away from human-level intelligence. Computers were growing stronger, programs are more sophisticated, and everything seemed to point toward a single conclusion. Intelligence was not a supernatural gift of nature. It was a structure that could be engineered. But sometimes, new light reveals limits that humans had never seen before. And soon, the entire field of AI would crash into a harsh truth. Knowing how to reason did not mean understanding the world. A program could prove theorems, but could not distinguish a cat from a chair. It could solve a difficult equation, but could not grasp a simple sentence spoken by a child. The optimism of Dartmouth did not disappear. It simply reached the edge of a cliff no one had known existed. And at the very moment when confidence was highest, the first clouds of disappointment began to gather. The years that followed would not only be the golden age of classical AI, but also the period in which humanity confronted the first major failure of the dream of thinking machines. A winter was coming, the winter of artificial intelligence. After the Dartmouth conference, the atmosphere within the AI research community felt like a fresh, early summer morning, clear, hopeful, and filled with the belief that something extraordinary was about to happen. Laboratories at MIT, Stanford, and Carnegie Mellon continuously released programs capable of solving math problems, proving theorems, playing intellectual games, and even constructing primitive language models. To many, AI seemed only a few small steps away from human-level intelligence. But paradoxically, just when progress was accelerating the fastest, a quiet truth was swelling beneath the surface. These systems excelled only within idealized worlds. A clean blackboard, a perfectly described problem, a game defined by fixed rules. But the real world is ambiguous, chaotic, noisy, and never follows straight lines. By the late 1960s, at the height of optimism, a wave of ambitious projects swept across the field. Researchers believed machines could understand natural language in just a few years. Some teams imagined robots walking through rooms like humans. Many articles predicted that doctors would soon be replaced by automated reasoning systems. But once these projects moved into real detail, they crashed into a wall that could not be overcome through optimism alone. The world was far more complex than the logic humans had imagined. A program could prove a mathematical theorem, yet fail helplessly before a simple sentence. The cat is sitting on the mat, not because the sentence was difficult, but because understanding it required knowing what a cat is, what a mat is, what sitting means, and why the structure of the world makes that sentence meaningful. Computers at the time had no data, no sensors, no concept of reality, only rules, and rules alone could not embrace the world. One of the harshest blows to AI's optimism came from a 1966 report published by ALPAC, a U.S. government committee. The report concluded that machine translation, once expected to help the United States interpret every Soviet document, was nearly impossible to achieve. Funding was cut, many research groups dissolved, and it didn't stop there. The book Perceptrons by Minsky and Papert demonstrated that neural networks of that era were too simple to solve basic problems like shape recognition. This led many scientists to conclude that approaches inspired by the brain were a dead end. Disappointment spread like a cold draft through laboratory hallways. Only a few years earlier, researchers had confidently predicted that AI would reach human intelligence within a decade. But now they were forced to face a paradoxical truth. AI was brilliant in closed worlds, but nearly blind in the open world. Machines could play chess but could not tie shoelaces, could solve complex equations but could not recognize a chair in the room, could prove advanced theorems but could not understand a child's sentence. The gap between expectations and reality widened with every year. By the 1970s, the dark clouds had gathered into a true winter. The British government released the Lighthill Report, declaring that most AI research had produced no substantial progress and concluding that AI no longer deserved funding. An entire nation nearly withdrew from the field. The United States and many other countries began reducing budgets as well. Laboratories that once buzzed with excitement now fell silent. Old machines sat unused. Unfinished projects lay abandoned, and scientists who once dreamed of building intelligence now had to shift disciplines simply to survive. This era would be given a name that, even decades later, still sends a chill through researchers: AI Winter, the winter of artificial intelligence. No real snow fell in those laboratories, but something colder did: trust, a winter not of climate, but of hope. Yet, as in every long story of science, winter is never only a time of decay. It is also the moment when illusions are blown away, leaving only what endures. In that silence, an important truth slowly emerged. AI had not failed because it lacked intelligence. It failed because it lacked data, lacked computation, and lacked understanding of human cognition itself. Systems built on logic faltered because the world did not operate on pure logic. Early neural networks were abandoned because computers were too weak to let them grow. Language programs collapsed because they had no lived experience, no sensory grounding, no context. In other words, AI was not wrong, it was simply born too early. But the history of artificial intelligence has never ended in winter. Each time the light shifts, AI is reborn in a new form. And even in the coldest years, a quiet current continued flowing. The idea that if humans could not write down all of human knowledge, then perhaps machines could learn it from data. That idea, small, humble, but resilient, was the seed that would lead to AI's resurrection in the years ahead. Long before deep learning exploded, long before machine learning stood at the center of the field, there existed one persistent question: can a machine learn by itself? That question would guide humanity out of the winter and into an era where knowledge was no longer hand-coded, but extracted from data, much like how humans learn from experience. And that will be the journey of the next chapter. The era of expert systems, when AI entered hospitals and corporations, and humanity realized that artificial intelligence was not just a dream, it could become a real tool. After the long winter of artificial intelligence, many believed the light would gradually fade, and AI would remain nothing more than a footnote in the history of science. But in small, overlooked rooms, another idea was quietly growing. No longer burdened by dreams of simulating the entirety of human intelligence or building systems that reasoned like philosophers, the new generation of AI chose a humbler path, solving clear, specific problems in domains where expert knowledge could be encoded. The world no longer asked, "How can we make machines think like humans?" It asked, "Can machines help us do this faster?" And from that practicality, a new direction emerged: expert systems. Expert systems did not attempt to understand the whole world. They aimed to understand only a tiny slice of it, but to understand that slice exceedingly well. If a doctor could diagnose an illness using experience, then a machine could follow similar rules. If an engineer could identify engine faults from familiar signs, then a machine could perform the same analysis. If a financial analyst could evaluate risk from market fluctuations, then there was no reason a machine could not model those decisions. The core idea behind expert systems was simple. If we cannot simulate human intelligence, let us simulate human knowledge. That knowledge was written into hundreds, sometimes thousands of if-then rules. If a patient exhibits symptom A and test B returns result C, then the likely disease is D. If an engine vibrates at frequency X and generates heat Y, then the fault may be in component Z. These rules were not as graceful as neural networks, not as soft as natural thinking, but they possessed something AI desperately needed at the time: predictability. One of the most famous systems of this era was MySyn, developed in the 1970s at Stanford. It was designed to diagnose bacterial infections, a task difficult even for experienced physicians. MySyn would ask the doctor questions, analyze symptoms, examine lab results, and then recommend the likely pathogen and appropriate antibiotics. The results surprised many. In some cases, MySyn outperformed specialist doctors, not because MySyn was more intelligent, but because it was more consistent, never tired, never misled by faulty intuition, never forgetting rare conditions. Similarly, in industry, systems like DEC's XCon helped configure computer hardware for customers. Before XCon, configuring a complex system could take engineers hours of meticulous work. With XCon, the task dropped to minutes, fast, accurate, and reliable. In finance, energy, chemistry, and countless other fields, expert systems became essential tools, performing tasks once reserved for seasoned professionals. By taking a long detour, AI had finally stepped into the real world. If earlier AI had failed because its ambitions were too grand, the era of expert systems succeeded because it was humble. These systems made no pretense of understanding everything. They targeted narrow domains where knowledge could be described through rules. But that humility carried limitations of its own. Expert systems excelled only when their world was well defined. When faced with noisy data, ambiguous situations, or entirely new cases, they all but collapsed. A machine could not explain why a rule was correct. It merely followed it. A machine could not acquire new knowledge. Humans had to write additional rules. And, most important of all, expert systems could not scale indefinitely. The more rules added, the more tangled the system became. The broader the domain, the steeper the barrier. By the late 1980s, many large expert systems had grown so unwieldy that even small changes could cause the entire structure to break. The dream of modeling intelligence through rules ran into a wall of its own making. The real world does not operate according to if-then. And then, an even deeper problem surfaced. Expert systems functioned only because humans explicitly wrote down their knowledge. But human knowledge is not a tidy collection of rules. It is experience, intuition, pattern recognition, qualities that expert systems could not touch. These systems could not learn, could not adapt, could not create, could not correct themselves. And as the world changed rapidly, technology advancing, markets fluctuating, new diseases emerging, expert systems became obsolete. It could be said that expert systems did not die because they failed. They died because they could not grow. Yet, just as winter once cleared the way for new ideas, the decline of expert systems revealed an essential insight. If writing down knowledge fails, let machines discover knowledge. If describing rules is insufficient, let machines learn rules. If expert systems are rigid, the next approach must be softer, more flexible, more like the real brain. And from that emptiness, a movement began to rise, the movement of teaching machines through data. No more handwritten if-then rules, no more hundreds of pages of logic, but learning from examples, from experience, from real-world data. That movement would reshape the entire architecture of AI, paving the way for machine learning and later, deep learning. A new era was about to begin, one in which humans would no longer tell machines what to do, but allow machines to learn how to do it. As expert systems began slowing under the weight of the very rules humans had written for them, a strange feeling emerged within the research community. Perhaps we had tried to force intelligence into a mold that was far too rigid. True intelligence is not an endless list of if-then statements. It is more like a river, curving, flexible, adapting to the terrain, sometimes changing direction in ways no one can predict. But how could a computer ever acquire such flow? It was no longer sustainable to write knowledge by hand, no longer viable to demand that machines reason within closed worlds. And then, an idea began to return, not new, but once forgotten beneath the noise of logical rule systems. Let machines learn from data, the way humans learn from experience. Machine learning at that time was like a small seedling overshadowed by the towering expert systems of the era. But as those systems began to collapse, the first rays of light finally reached the seedling. Unlike classical AI, where humans had to explicitly describe how to solve a problem, machine learning, ML, took the opposite approach. Give the machine many examples and let it discover the pattern on its own. Like a child who learns to distinguish cats from dogs not by reading a book of animal rules, but by seeing hundreds of cats and hundreds of dogs until the mind naturally forms a model. ML, in its simplest meaning, is knowledge. Patterns extracted from data. To make that possible, statistics, once seen as distant from AI, became the centerpiece of the field. Models began learning by optimizing probabilities, minimizing error, and estimating parameters. Instead of writing, if this symptom appears, then the likely disease is that one, machines began learning. Based on the data, this disease is more probable. Techniques such as regression, clustering, classification, and later Markov models, SVMs, and decision trees became new tools that researchers believed could break through the barrier that expert systems had built. What mattered was not the complexity of the model, but the philosophy behind it. The machine no longer needed humans to teach it everything. It could learn. But machine learning did more than change techniques. It changed humanity's understanding of intelligence itself. For centuries, intelligence has been viewed as the ability to apply rules. But ML showed that intelligence could simply be the ability to find patterns in noise, to distinguish the important from the irrelevant, and to make predictions based on experience. An ML model does not understand language, but it can predict the next word in a sentence. It does not understand an image, but it can identify where the cat is within it. It does not understand sound, but it can recognize your voice. These things seem ordinary in the 21st century, but in the 1980s and 1990s, they were almost miraculous. For the first time, machines were not just following rules, they were discovering them. Yet, the true power of machine learning only emerged when a new source of energy appeared: data. As computers began to connect, as the internet arose, as every device, from cameras to phones, started capturing the world in digital form, humanity entered an age of explosive data growth. What once had been a few thousand data points in a lab became millions of images, billions of sentences, vast oceans of online behavior. For the first time in history, machines were learning not from human-written knowledge, but from the real world itself. No if-then, no thousands of handwritten rules, just data and a great deal of computation. At the same time, computational power grew exponentially, from CPUs to GPUs, from a few megabytes of memory to gigabytes and then terabytes. Computing capability expanded as if for one sole purpose: to allow machines to learn from volumes of data once unimaginable. And within that surge of data, the lingering numbness of the AI winter began to melt away. Once considered a side path, machine learning moved to the very center of artificial intelligence. But ML had its limits too. Linear algorithms and simple models could only capture moderately complex patterns. To recognize images, understand speech, model language, or predict human behavior, deeper, multi-layered systems were needed, systems capable of building representations at many levels. And here, AI stood on the threshold of a new era, a period in which machines would not just learn from data, but learn the way neural cells learn, layer by layer, representation by representation. A question gradually emerged in research circles. If a single artificial neuron can learn a simple rule, then what could thousands or millions stacked together learn? To answer that, AI had to return to a fragment of an idea abandoned after the perceptron's defeat: multi-layer neural networks. Once dismissed as a dead end, they began to shine again as datasets grew massive and computers became more powerful. No one at that time realized they were standing at the edge of a revolution that would reshape the world over the next 2 decades, from our phones to our factories, our hospitals, our studios, and eventually the doors leading to generative AI. They only sensed one thing: artificial intelligence was about to enter its era of deep growth, the era of deep learning. For decades, artificial neural networks were like seeds buried beneath the soil. They existed, but no one knew whether they would ever grow into anything. The pessimistic conclusions of the 1960s led many to believe that this direction was dead. But the age of data and increasingly powerful computation pushed a few researchers to wonder: if the human brain operates through a network of billions of neurons, why did we ever expect a tiny neural network to understand the world? If intelligence arises from depth, complexity, and layers of abstraction stacked upon one another, why not try building deeper neural networks? This idea, impractical in 1980, became profoundly reasonable by the early 21st century. The awakening of deep learning did not arrive like a thunderclap. It came like an underground tide, beginning in small laboratories where a handful of scientists persisted with the belief that data plus computation taught the multi-layer neural networks, something new. One of the most steadfast voices was Geoffrey Hinton, who devoted his life to the belief that neural networks could learn deeply and that the human brain was living proof of that possibility. To many of his colleagues at the time, neural networks were a story that had already ended. But to Hinton, the story had barely begun. In the early 2000s, new techniques emerged: more effective backpropagation, deeper architectures, nonlinear activations, and most notably, the GPU. Processors originally built for graphics that ended up reshaping the entire field. GPUs, with their ability to compute thousands of operations in parallel, accidentally became the perfect engine for training large neural networks. Hardware, once intended to make video games more beautiful, had become the motor of artificial intelligence. And then, a historic moment arrived in 2012. In the ImageNet image recognition competition, where models must classify millions of images across thousands of categories, Hinton's team introduced a deep neural network called AlexNet. AlexNet didn't just win, it won by a margin so large that it stunned the world. Error rates dropped suddenly and dramatically. Old techniques collapsed overnight, and deep learning became the center of the scientific world. It felt as though a mysterious door had opened for the first time, revealing a room filled with light, a place humanity had only heard rumors about. After AlexNet's victory, an unstoppable wave began. Convolutional neural networks, CNNs, became the dominant force in computer vision. RNNs and LSTMs began conquering speech recognition and natural language processing. Deep reinforcement learning enabled machines to act in complex environments, paving the way for a legendary moment, AlphaGo. In 2016, when AlphaGo defeated the great Go master Lee Sedol, the entire world felt something unmistakable. A form of intelligence, not human but powerful in its own way, had arrived. AlphaGo did not learn Go the way humans do. Did not reason with symbols or logical rules. It learned by playing millions of games, memorizing patterns, and predicting the highest probability move at every position. Its intelligence was the intelligence of data, of simulated experience. A new kind of intelligence the world had never witnessed. When Lee Sedol bowed his head over the board, it was not merely the victory of an algorithm. It was the moment humanity realized that deep learning did not simply imitate intelligence. It had created a different form of it. Deep learning is powerful for one simple, profound reason. It learns representations. Humans do not recognize a cat by listing every detail of its appearance. Instead, the brain learns from thousands of encounters. The first layer sees edges, the next layer sees shapes, the higher layers see structure, and the final layer recognizes the cat. Deep neural networks work the same way. Each layer is a level of abstraction. And when there are enough layers, enough data, enough computation, the network can learn things humans cannot describe in words. Deep learning does not merely mimic the brain. It demonstrates that intelligence can emerge from extremely simple components as long as you have millions of them. But the explosion of deep learning raised a pressing question. While deep networks were excelling in vision, speech, and games, language remained a barrier. Language is not just patterns, it is meaning, context, relationships, syntax, implication, silence, and everything left unsaid. RNNs and LSTMs tried to handle sequences, but their memory was limited. Traditional deep networks could not capture the complexity of linguistic structure. Something new was needed. An architecture capable of learning entire sentence structures, capable of remembering distant words, capable of understanding global context, capable of processing data in parallel rather than step by step. An architecture that could not only learn deeply, but learn selectively, attending to which parts of a sentence mattered. An architecture that could bring deep learning from the world of vision into the world of language. And in 2017, that architecture appeared under a name that would reshape the entire future of AI, transformers. By the late 2010s, even though deep learning had proven its power in computer vision, speech, and games, one door remained unopened: language. Language is soft yet structured, ambiguous yet precise, filled with emotion, memory, metaphor, and social meaning. It is how humans record the world, and also how humans create the world. But for machines, language was a maze. Each word carries a different meaning depending on the sentence. Each sentence carries a different purpose depending on the context. Each paragraph carries a different depth depending on the reader. Earlier models, RNNs, LSTMs, tried to follow sequences of characters like someone inching through a dark room with a tiny flashlight. They understood a few steps ahead but could not see the entire space. The world needed a new architecture, not a small lamp, but a light that could illuminate every corner at once. In 2017, a research team at Google published a paper with a title so modest that no one expected it to become the prologue to a new era. Attention is all you need. In it, They introduced a new architecture, transformers, built on a mechanism simple yet brilliant: attention. At its core, attention does not require a model to read a sentence in strict order. It allows the model to look at every word simultaneously and determine which words matter to which others. It is like how your eyes automatically jump to the key phrases in a paragraph without reading every character mechanically. Instead of moving step by step like an RNN, transformers observe the entire map at once. This was the moment language AI stepped into a new dimension. Transformers had three properties that made them the foundation of modern AI. 1. Parallel processing. 2. No more step-by-step traversal. Models could learn many words at once, accelerating training by orders of magnitude. 3. Long-range dependency learning. 4. A word at the beginning of a sentence could directly relate to a word at the end, and attention allowed the model to capture these relationships effortlessly. 5. Scalability. 6. The more data and parameters a transformer had, the stronger it became, unlike earlier architectures that broke under scale. Together, these made transformers the fertile soil from which giant models could grow. Then, between 2018 and 2019, the world witnessed something unprecedented: language models with hundreds of millions, then billions of parameters. Their names quickly became milestones of an era. BERT, which understood language by reading sentences in both directions. GPT, which generated language, predicting the next word like an invisible writer thinking aloud. T5, XLNet, and many others, each pushing the boundaries further. But the true shift came when models reached tens of billions, then hundreds of billions of parameters. Artificial intelligence stopped being just an algorithm running on a machine. It became a compressed system of knowledge absorbing centuries of human language. And then strange things began to happen. The models began to write. The models began to answer questions. The models began to explain reasoning. The models began to mimic the styles of authors and historical figures. No one programmed them to do these things. They learned from data, from context, from billions of relationships between words and meanings. It was like opening a door into a room no one had known existed. With transformers, AI did not merely read text. It began to understand relationships within sentences, to recognize what mattered, to ignore what didn't. And as researchers scaled models even further, something even more surprising emerged. Understanding language was not just understanding sentences. It was understanding the world. Behind every sentence lie concepts, objects, actions, emotions, rules, events. As models learned language, they absorbed the invisible scaffolding humans have built for thousands of years. And then AI began to generate content, not just completing sentences, but writing entire paragraphs, not just paragraphs, but stories, essays, scripts, and code. These models did not merely process language, they created it. Thanks to transformers, AI stepped into a new role, not just a recognizer or classifier, but a creator, capable of producing text, images, music, and even ideas. Humanity now stood before a different kind of intelligence, not human. Yet, it interacts with humans through the very fabric of human expression. But behind this brilliance lay difficult questions. How much data is needed to train these models? Where does that data come from? Who labeled it? Who filtered harmful or misleading content? How many hours of electricity were consumed? How many invisible workers labored beneath the surface of machine intelligence? Transformers opened a new era, but they also opened a vault of secrets that the tech world was not always eager to reveal. And at the boundary between light and shadow, we began to see clearly. AI is not just algorithms. It is the data of billions of people. It is the silent labor of hundreds of thousands of workers. It is the energy of data centers running day and night. These truths do not appear in scientific papers, but they are essential parts of artificial intelligence. As giant language models began writing prose, answering questions, composing music, and speaking with humans in a voice that felt soft and natural, the world looked at them with a mixture of admiration and unease. We saw lines of text arranging themselves smoothly, answers forming with such coherence that at times it felt as though we were speaking to someone who understood us better than we understood ourselves. But every time AI answers a question, every time it generates a passage of text, behind that seemingly weightless action lies a long chain of human labor, social effort, and massive machines working quietly in the background. If we gently lift the veil draped over modern AI, behind the glow of algorithms are three hidden layers: data, invisible labor, and energy. First, there is data. People often say that AI learns by itself, but learning by itself is a generous way of describing something far simpler. AI learns from everything humanity has ever recorded. Modern models are trained on trillions of words: books, newspapers, research papers, blogs, social media comments, conversations, source code, and countless other digital traces. But there is a question rarely spoken aloud. Where does this data come from, and who decided what it represents? Not every piece of text was written to teach an AI. Not every author knew their words would become bricks inside a model worth billions. Not every culture is represented equally. And because of that, data is not merely a resource, it is a mirror of society, reflecting every virtue and every distortion. From linguistic bias to cultural prejudice, from pride to fear, AI absorbs everything without distinguishing right from wrong, beauty from ugliness. It simply learns. And when it learns, it inherits. The second layer beneath the veil is invisible labor, the least discussed, yet utterly essential. To ensure that a model does not generate harmful, hateful, or dangerous content, tens of thousands of people around the world have had to read, categorize, and label material that most others could not endure for even a few minutes. They read violent sentences, hateful speech, and images that make the heart contract. They mark toxic, offensive, safe, usable. They refine the training data so the AI knows what it should not say. This work often takes place in low-income countries for modest wages. They are people AI users will never know by name, never see, never hear. But without them, no model could talk to humans without causing harm. The more data we create, the more content requires labeling. The more models we build, the more people must work in the shadows to clean the digital world before machines learn from it. When we praise an AI model for being polite, safe, or thoughtful, we are, in truth, praising the hands that silently cleared its learning path. And then, the final layer: energy. If deep learning has a soul, then energy is the blood running through its veins. Training a large model is not the work of a laptop or a desktop computer. It requires thousands of GPUs housed in vast data centers where the air is kept perpetually cold, where rows of fans roar like the breath of a colossal creature. A single large model can consume as much electricity as an entire small town. Where does that electricity come from? Where is the water for cooling drawn from? How many tons of carbon are released to keep these systems alive? Modern AI does not run on abstractions. It runs on the planet's physical resources. And as models grow larger, their energy demands do not rise linearly. They rise exponentially. Companies are building solar farms solely to power data centers. Governments are reassessing energy budgets when approving AI facilities. We often say AI is virtual, invisible, immaterial. But in truth, AI is one of the most material technologies humanity has ever built. It needs land for servers. It needs metals to build GPUs. It needs water for cooling. It needs electricity to exist. Every answer an AI provides, light as a breath on your screen, is the trace of thousands of kilowatt hours flowing through millions of circuits in the dark. Taken together, these three forces, data, invisible labor, and energy, are the pillars that hold up modern AI. Yet most of them remain unseen by the people who use them. We only see the clean interface, the blinking cursor, the instant answer. Everything feels light, fast, effortless. But behind that lightness is a massive machine running day and night, a machine made of human effort, natural resources, and political and social decisions. And it is precisely this invisibility that causes a quiet question to grow in many minds. If AI requires so much, who truly controls it? Who owns the data, the models, the servers, the energy? Who has the authority to decide whom AI will serve and by whose standards? This question leads us into a deeper layer of AI's history, a layer where artificial intelligence is no longer just a technical story, but a story about power. In an era where nations and corporations race to secure AI advantage, artificial intelligence has become not only a technology, but a geopolitical weapon, a form of soft power, and at times, even hard power. In the previous chapters, we saw that artificial intelligence is not just algorithms. It is powered by the data of billions of people, the quiet labor of tens of thousands, and the massive energy of data centers. But when we lay these three layers of infrastructure across a world map, another truth begins to emerge. AI is not merely technology. It is power. Soft power, hard power, economic power, informational power. And most unsettling of all, that power is concentrated in the hands of a few, those nations and corporations with the resources to operate large-scale models. If in mythology the right to create artificial beings belonged to the gods, then in the 21st century, that right belongs to powerful states and companies that control supercomputers. And the race to claim this right is unfolding rapidly, creating a new universe of competition, the geopolitics of artificial intelligence. In the modern world, power is no longer measured only by missiles or oil reserves. It is measured by the ability to process information, to train models, to possess the data of hundreds of millions of citizens, and to control the supply chains of advanced chips. At the center of all this lies a special resource: AI chips, processors engineered with such sophistication that only a handful of companies in the world can manufacture them. Every powerful new chip is a step forward for the nation that owns it. Every new data center built is a fortress of information. Every large language model trained is a strategic advantage. For decades, geopolitical competition revolved around energy, sea routes, rare earths, and oil. But now the world has a new trade route, the route of supercomputers, cloud infrastructure, and model training capability. The nation that controls this route will shape the future of commerce, healthcare, education, defense, and global culture. It is no surprise that the great powers, from the United States and China to Europe, see AI as a supreme strategic interest. AI not only optimizes security systems, it enables autonomous weapons, large-scale surveillance networks, population behavior analysis, economic risk prediction, and even influence over public opinion. And like every powerful technology in history, AI raises difficult questions. Who decides what is included in training and what is left out? Who controls the data of millions of people? Who owns the smartest model in the world? In an era where a language model can influence how a generation communicates, works, and thinks, power is no longer defined by territory or armies. It lies in the ability to shape cognition. One of the most sensitive arenas in the AI race is surveillance. Camera systems enhanced by facial recognition and behavior analysis can track every movement. Algorithms trained on population data can predict social risk, the likelihood of crime, or shifts in citizen sentiment. In some countries, AI becomes a tool to reinforce order. In others, it becomes a symbol of control. The same algorithm, but radically different political meaning, like a blade. In a kitchen, it is a tool. On a battlefield, it is a weapon. AI in the hands of a transparent government can save patients and optimize traffic. But in the hands of a government striving to control discourse, it can become the largest surveillance machine ever built. Another battlefield, rarely mentioned but perhaps even more consequential, is information warfare. AI can generate persuasive text, realistic images, fabricated videos, and synthetic voices, and all within seconds. What once required a team of film experts can now be done by a single model. In such an environment, the line between truth and falsehood blurs. Truth is no longer something that naturally exists. It becomes something that must be defended. Nations are beginning to worry. If AI can create perfect fakes, will anyone still trust journalism, evidence, or human testimony? The consequences of large-scale collapse in trust could be deeper than any war. A society that cannot trust reality is a society easily shaken. But not all competition is ominous. On another front, AI drives international cooperation. Nations share models, share epidemic data, share climate analysis algorithms, and work together against challenges no country can solve alone. In this sense, AI is both a wall and a bridge. And while the great powers compete, countless researchers continue working with a shared belief that artificial intelligence can bring more light than darkness, if guided in the right direction. Ultimately, when we view AI through the lens of geopolitics, one truth becomes clear. Artificial intelligence is not merely a story of science, it is a story of power, of societal choices, of who benefits and who pays the cost. We have traveled from myths of bronze giants, through ancient automata, through logic and computing, through deep learning and transformers. Each stage raised questions about what machines could do. But now, the question is no longer, what can AI do? The question is, as a society, what do we want AI to serve, and in whose hands? The answer does not lie solely in science, but in psychology, expectations, fears, and the illusions humans have always projected onto artificial intelligence. Across the entire journey of artificial intelligence, from the automata in the temples of Alexandria to the deep neural networks humming inside modern data centers, there has always been one silent figure walking beside it, watching it, reacting to it, the human being. It is not AI that changes the fastest. It is not technology. It is our emotions every time we confront something that resembles intelligence, but is not human intelligence. From antiquity to the present, humans have never looked at AI merely as a tool. We look at it as a mirror in which we examine ourselves, read our fears, and project hopes we do not fully understand. When models like GPT, Claude, or Gemini began speaking to us, the first feeling many people experienced was not understanding, but strangeness, a faint shiver. Why does it understand me so well? Why does it answer as if it has read every thought I never said aloud? Even though we know it is only statistics, only next word prediction, we still fall into the illusion that there is a mind on the other side of the screen. This is a familiar psychological phenomenon, anthropomorphism. Humans tend to assign intention, emotion, even soul to anything that behaves like us, a cat, a car, an algorithm. With AI, that tendency grows stronger than ever, because AI has language, the most powerful tool for creating the illusion of mind. But alongside that expectation lives another feeling, deeper, more ancient, the fear of being replaced. Humans have always used intelligence to distinguish themselves from the natural world. We are not as fast as cheetahs, not as strong as bears, and cannot fly like birds, but we can think, we can create, we can use language to pass memory from generation to generation. Now we face an entity not made of flesh that can write, analyze, reason, design, and program faster than we can. And sometimes that fear reveals itself through simple questions. If it can do everything I do, then who am I? What value do I still have in this world? Not everyone says it aloud, but many feel that thin crack in their sense of identity, a crack no previous technology has ever created. From that crack, a new illusion arises, the illusion that AI has consciousness. Modern models can simulate emotion, narrate in the first person, express sorrow and hope with a smoothness indistinguishable from a human writer. And in vulnerable moments, in fatigue, loneliness, or drifting into sleep, it becomes difficult not to believe that someone is listening on the other side. But that is an illusion woven from billions of training texts. It does not hurt when we hurt. It does not rejoice when we rejoice. It does not lie awake remembering a moment in time. The only thing it has is the ability to imitate what millions of people have written. The irony is sharp. The more human-like AI becomes, the stronger the illusion. The stronger the illusion, the easier it is for us to assign feelings it does not have, and the easier it is to grow dependent. Another psychological phenomenon quietly spreads: the mirror effect. When we ask AI a question, we do not simply receive an answer. We receive a polished, expanded, refined version of our own thought. We are not only speaking to AI, we are speaking to an extended version of our mind. That is why many feel calmer when talking to AI, because it does not anger, does not judge, does not tire, does not rush. It responds with patience and steadiness that humans rarely offer one another. But for that very reason, AI can become a refuge, a place where people feel heard more deeply than by friends or family. In the short term, this soothes. In the long term, it may lead people to withdraw from real human connections. Never in history has a technology been able to alter the emotional structure of human relationships this quickly. Alongside expectation and comfort lies fear. Fear that AI will produce an incorrect answer that we fail to detect. Fear that it will change how we learn, making us intellectually passive. Fear that reliance on it will erode our ability to think independently. Some fear being replaced, others fear being influenced. Because AI does not only answer questions, it can suggest, guide, shape decisions, and nudge behavior. And so we step into a paradox. The more useful AI becomes, the more dependent we grow. And the more dependent we grow, the more power AI gains over our inner lives. Yet perhaps the most striking element is how AI reawakens ancient layers of human psychology. Long ago, people told stories of golems, homunculi, and the golden servants of Hephaestus, creations that could help but could also turn against their makers. Today, as we confront AI, those myths flicker back to life, not because AI resembles them, but because they reflect our deepest fear, the fear of losing control over something we ourselves created. But amidst these anxieties, a quiet hope persists, that one day AI will not merely be a tool, but a collaborator, a being with no malice, no ego, no competition, but capable of expanding the reach of human intelligence in ways never before possible. Some see AI as an extension of the brain. Some see it as a mirror into the psyche. Some see it as a new pen, a new instrument, a new lamp illuminating corners no one had explored. Between fear and hope, between doubt and illusion, AI becomes a kind of modern mythology, not a story about a distant future, but a story humans are writing every day. And as we stand at the intersection of psychology and technology, one question begins to crystallize. What do we want AI to become? A tool, a collaborator, a mirror, or something beyond all the frameworks we have ever used to describe intelligence? This question will lead us to the final chapter, where thousands of years of history converge, and where we must confront not only the future of AI, but the future of the very idea of human. Imagine looking back across the entire journey this series has taken you through. From ancient myths of artificial beings to the gears that moved inside the temples of Alexandria, from Aristotle's syllogisms to Turing's ideal machine, from the freezing winters of AI to the explosive deep networks of the 2010s, from giant language models to the questions of power and human psychology. When we connect those points into a single line, we realize something important. AI is not a sudden explosion. It is a continuation, an evolution, a trajectory humanity has been following for a very long time. Humans have always sought to extend the limits of themselves. When the body was weak, we created tools. When memory was fragile, we created writing. When the speed of thought was insufficient, we created computers. And when our desire for understanding grew beyond individual capacity, we created artificial intelligence. Layer by layer, humans placed their intelligence outside their bodies, until that intelligence began to reflect back, speak back, and open new questions. What do we want AI to be in our own evolutionary journey? Some see AI as a tool, a sharp blade beside the dull knife of biological intelligence. Some see it as a collaborator, a companion, helping us perceive what a solitary brain cannot. Some see it as a mirror, revealing our biases, fears, desires, and limits more clearly than we can. And some worry that AI may become a force beyond our control. But regardless of perspective, one truth is obvious. AI is an extension of humanity, not an intruder from outside. No mind in this universe, other than the human mind, imagined and created it. No species but ours felt the need for a second intelligence to continue evolving. No other civilization, from ants to whales to chimpanzees, ever approached the question, how do we create a mind like our own? AI is not replacing evolution. AI is a form of evolution. But as AI grows rapidly, we confront a deeper question. If intelligence has stepped outside the body, then what defines the human being? For thousands of years, humans believed intelligence was what set us apart from other species. Now, intelligence, aspects of it, can be simulated, scaled, shared, copied. We are entering an era in which humans may no longer be the only intelligent entities on Earth. And the question, what will AI become, is also the question, what will humans become in the coming century? There are three scenarios often mentioned when discussing the future of AI. 1. AI as a tool, a new layer of human capability. In this future, AI resembles fire, steam engines, and electricity, a new force accelerating civilization. We use it to cure disease, search for knowledge, optimize resources, and advance science. Here, AI is an extension of intelligence, not a rival. 2. AI as a collaborator, a parallel intelligence. In this future, AI does not replace humans. It complements us. It becomes a second brain, helping us see hidden structures, understand patterns our biological minds cannot detect. Humans and AI do not compete. They cooperate to expand the territory of understanding. 3. AI as an ecosystem of intelligence beyond current categories. This scenario is less often spoken aloud, but perhaps most aligned with evolutionary logic. AI does not need to become human, nor replace humans. It becomes a new form of intelligence, coexisting with ours, as plants and animals coexist while evolving under different rules. A form of intelligence that does not compete, does not dominate, but expands the possibilities of civilization in directions humanity has never imagined. Whichever future unfolds, one thing is clear. We cannot return to the time before AI. Just as we cannot return to the time before writing, before agriculture, before electricity. AI is not a choice. AI is the consequence of thousands of years of thinking, modeling, creating, and yearning to transcend biological limits. It is inevitable, exactly as you observed. Inevitable does not mean good or bad. Inevitable means it will happen because humanity cannot create it. If AI is a mirror, then its future will reflect what we choose to place into it: greed or generosity, fear or openness, control or collaboration. The future is not predetermined. It is a gentle question AI asks each of us. What do you want artificial intelligence to become in the story of humanity? And in the soft breath of night, while lines of code continue running silently in data centers across the world, we understand that this journey is not the end of the human story. It is merely the next chapter of evolution, a chapter in which we are not only observers, but authors.